If none, Chair closes that. We're going to take up our last issue that's on the agenda today. So the Chair would like to call up General Nichols and Director McCraw and Dr. Janik, if you'll come on up all at the same time, because we've got plenty of room.
I've seen these guys somewhere before. Yeah, that's what it was.
And if Judge Speech will be on deck and Mr. Gruber, just kind of be up around the front there, because we're just going to go back and forth and up and down. And good afternoon, General, Director, Doctor, and Dr. Janik, how was it listening to some of the legislation that you voted for and against over the years before you in your current position at Health and Human Services? Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Director McCraw, I think I'd like to just kind of start off with you, and the members are, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make comment again as I started with the very beginning of this, because I'm going to make a little bit of comment, if you don't mind. I have the ability to do that with the gavel. There's a lot of facts. There's a lot of reality, and there's some misinformation. I want to be clear to you, Director McCraw, and the TAG especially, from a person who actually lives on the border. I live on the border. I deal with this every day. And some of the actions by our state, we have a very, very large and diverse state. And I had sent a letter to the governor and a letter to the TAG when the governor was calling out the National Guard, asking how many troops would be sent to El Paso. And to be fair to the governor and to you, General, I already knew what the answer was, but you have to understand, some of us who live on the border, with the frustration of people wanting to come down to my community and tell me what is different from what I already know, is a tough pill to swallow on occasion. I believe that there probably will not be any National Guard troops sent to El Paso. Maybe there is some plan if things change, and things might change because of surges in different places. As we've heard the director tell us in the past about surges in the past, sometimes it moves it to the Arizona border or the New Mexico border because of that. And I think the actions in Texas overall are actually going to be a positive thing for our nation and the discussion of immigration and safety on the border, because what we're doing here is going to show up in Arizona. Having said that, it's very difficult today's time to not be partisan about this. I mean, I'm going to be self-deprecating here for a moment. I made some comments that were repeated in the newspaper in El Paso and other places, and somebody came up and said, "Hey, Pickett, I didn't know you were a Democrat." Well, I am a Democrat. Well, but we didn't know you were a Democrat until you took a position on the immigration, because it's partisan. We've got to get away from this being a partisan issue. It is so much that way on the federal side. So there's going to be times with your testimony, Director, and the TAG that I'm going to probably agree more than you think, but I do have some issues because of where I come from, not because I'm a Democrat. We're going to have people testify here who have viewpoints different than mine. We're going to have some landowners here who deal with this on a daily basis in South Texas. So I want to get it out there, so if the discussion goes somewhere else, at least it's on the record that this is a problem that our federal government, and I will now take flack, I'm sure I'll take flack for this, the current administration in Washington is not doing enough. They're not doing enough. I wish we weren't sending National Guard troops. I would hope that they would be more of a supportive role, and I'm going to hear more about that. So I'm going to be educated today by you gentlemen here as to what the governor's plan is, what your plan is, how much authority you have individually. And Dr. Janik, you're here, and I appreciate you making the offer. I know Dr. Lakey couldn't be with us, and providing us that information for people on the health side and their concerns, because your agency has a direct link both professionally and personally because of the dedication of people like Dr. Lakey. So having said that, Mr. McCraw, would you please line out, since we last met, where we are, and if you can, give us a few statistics, but I would like those to be more up to date. I don't want to get into the political fact stuff on going back to 2008. I want to hear about a little bit more of them currently, of what's going on there and the feedback, not only that you're getting from outside of the border, but the border community. So Steve, I'll over to you, and I appreciate what you do. It's a tough job.
Well, thank you very much. I've got a great agency that overcomes leadership on a daily basis. But first, my name is Steve McCraw, Director of the Texas Department of Public Safety. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and honorable members of this committee. Just to step back just a little bit so we can deal with the facts. I mean, there's no question that, as you said, the Texas-Mexico border is not secure. Now, I would say it's a 30-year sin. It's not been secure. It's not just something recent. It's happened over the years. The result, powerful, vicious, and I'd say cowardly, because that's what they are. Cowardly Mexican cartels who managed to evolve to a point where they exploit our borders to smuggle, and I would even say traffic, hundreds of thousands of people, and certainly millions of pounds of drugs on a routine basis, and they do it for money. And as a result of it, the money comes in, the people come in. I'm talking about from smuggling from all countries throughout the world, come into the country, throughout Texas, and throughout the nation. The same thing with the drugs.
Steve, what makes today a crisis versus the numbers a few years ago that were actually higher than they are today?
Well, actually, they're lower than 3 years ago. In fact, in 2011, there were over 112,000 that were apprehended in Texas. Most recently, 2013 complete year, it over doubled to 242,669. And if you look back right now in calendar year this year, and I say calendar year, I mean we got 5 months left, Mr. Chairman, and we got 225,668 undocumented aliens that have come. That includes unaccompanied children, comes family units, but also includes, which I quite frankly don't consider a security problem at all. It's certainly an issue for others, but from a public safety standpoint, it's not a security problem. But the other 80%, is certainly a challenge from a law enforcement standpoint, because it includes cartels, it includes cartel operatives, it includes transnational gangs. For example, recently, June and July, Border Patrol arrested 63 MS-13 members in those OTMs, other than Mexican nationals, crossing the Rio Grande Valley. That's real. Criminal aliens that come in, and I use these numbers. Sadly, Sunday night, a Border Patrol agent was murdered by 2 criminal aliens while he was fishing with his father. You go and look at just from the last 3 months as it relates to criminal aliens. We've had, if you look at it from April 1st to June, which is a 90-day period, there was 18 in Texas, and that I don't count other states, and we're not counting before that time or even criminal records before that time. But just those 90 days, we had as many as, let's see, we had over 18,034 charges were filed against criminal aliens in Texas. Now, 8,496 of those were the most serious offenses. And that includes 35 signs, 143 sexual assaults, 99 robberies, 32 burglaries, 2,183 assaults. So those numbers are, obviously timely, and they are concerned. Now, we look at the numbers and what does that mean? In fact, our hometown paper, I got to meet them last time I testified, and they were concerned that they may be inflated or we may be trying to create or generate a problem. And I was very candid. As someone that has to work human trafficking investigations, these criminal aliens most frequently prey upon the migrants that come across, illegal or illegal. Well, that's the way the criminal aliens operate.
Now, Steve, we add to that the issue of the unaccompanied children.
Yes, sir.
That has seen an increase like we've never had before.
Yes, sir.
So that's exacerbating the problem, and you made a comment about, I guess, the family units not necessarily being a problem. So now we've got a second thing that's going on at the same time, and have people been able to separate the two out?
Well, yes, but when I said not a problem, not a security problem, it certainly is a problem for the system.
You're right.
And it overwhelms, and from a security standpoint, it overwhelms Border Patrol.
Yeah, you don't feel the violence or the necessary...
I'm not worried about a 6-year-old kid, okay, in terms of vetting them. And I'm not worried about anybody that goes into Border Patrol's hands. They have an opportunity to vet them anyway at that point in time and do an ident fingerprint-based check, security check along those lines. But we are concerned, obviously, about these other individuals that come in, the 80% that come undetected. And those are just the ones that we capture, not the ones we don't capture that migrate into these communities and prey upon them. And these human trafficking investigations that we deal with right now, where you've got 10 illegal aliens, and I say criminal aliens, that we just indicted and had to rescue 13 illegal aliens who had been lured into Texas under the guise of being a nanny and the guise of working in a domestic job, were brutally raped and compelled into aggravated prostitution and maintained that way. One we rescued when she's 21 years old. When she came here, she was 13. So there's some, when I talk about criminal aliens, I am serious about criminal aliens have an impact on Texans and also a disproportionate impact on the immigrant communities, legal and illegal, in our state and our nation as well. And when I talk MS-13, I deal with Colonel Edmondson of Louisiana yesterday, talking to him, or my counterpart in New Jersey. MS-13 is our border problem is their MS-13 problem, is what's going on right now, with 75% of the OTMs being captured in the Rio Grande Valley. And really, the Rio Grande Valley right now is the center of gravity for drug and human smuggling for the nation. Make no mistake about it. So we are concerned about those particular numbers. We've been very candid about what those numbers mean. We're also concerned another number is that the drugs, increased drug availability. And what people don't know is, because like anything else, you start seizing drugs. I mean, how many drugs didn't you seize? When you go back and look at from a market economy standpoint, and you look at and check, well, let's look at the homework in terms of, well, how has the border security or lack thereof impacted the Mexican cartels? And how's it impacted drug prices? Well, since 2010, and in 2010, the National Drug Intelligence Center, working for the Department of Justice, came across, annually they would produce what the cost of drugs were.
Steve, let me take you a little further. Let's go. Let's say that all this attention that we're getting nationally, and we may or may not get from the administration. Let's say we do. Let's say that the administration in Washington, D.C. does what the state of Texas, not that we all agree, but it is what the majority believes right now. The state of Texas wants from the federal government. They come down here and they show us they're going to secure the border. What would be DPS's role if that is met? If we get what we say we want, we want them to deal with real immigration reform. We want the federal government to do their job and come down here because they have the authority legally more than I would. If that happens, if we get their attention, what would be DPS's role? Are you still going to want more funding, more resources a year after we get their attention?
Perhaps, but not for border security, okay, to be candid. And we want to be proactive always with all threats, but we prefer to get out of the border security business. And that can be done. The commitment of resources, leadership, will, and doctrine. I mean, at the end of the day,
I don't think you realize how big a statement that you just made was. You would like to get out of the border security business.
Well, I think
that's a bold statement. In fact, I believe that you just made.
Well, I don't feel like I'm that bold making that statement. The bottom line is that the state legislature has put, general revenue funds and Texas taxpayer funds and doing something that is a sovereign responsibility of the federal government. And we're doing it because Texans don't like if you talk to ranchers and tell them, well, it's not our job. I mean, they don't buy that, and not really no Texans buy that, and they expect from a public safety standpoint that Texas is proactive, and the state legislature has been proactive with it. I mean, they've spoken not just with their words or enabling legislation, but with money. I mean, money, even when it was difficult to come up with money, the state legislature has found funds to be able to augment, our capabilities in terms of being proactive, whether it's on the water, in the air, or even along the border.
Well, that was prior to where we are today.
Yes, sir.
You received an increase in funding in this last Appropriations Act for that.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Now, on top of that, and again, it doesn't matter whether it comes from me, I think most of us would still want to know that any additional funds now are going for what purposes. And I know that there was a select committee that met last week, it was
Yes,
last
sir.
week, who had some of that discussion. Would you reiterate or clarify where this money is being used specifically?
Sure.
What are you using? What are you using the dollar for?
Well, first, it's important for us to have a goal of this operation. And when I say a goal, not just a DPS goal, but a unified goal with Border Patrol as our partners and local law enforcement agencies and our game warden partners, and also Texas Military Forces is now a partner of ours. Always has been as it relates to the counter-drug mission, but more so now with the recent activation. And the goal of Operation Strong Safety simply is to prevent Mexican cartels, their operatives, transnational gangs, criminal aliens, potential would-be terrorists, candidly, as long as we get individuals from countries with known al-Qaeda presence. For someone with a counterterrorism background, you have to worry about that. From entering and drugs from entering Texas between the ports of entry. And, through sustained, multi-agency saturation patrols in the high-threat areas. And right now the high-threat areas is what we would call zones 1 through 13, which is really the Rio Grande Valley. And more specifically, where the hottest spots are right now is Hidalgo County and Starr County. I mean, that's the center of gravity right now, and that's owned and operated by the Gulf Cartel from a northern Mexico standpoint. And our goal is to, at the end of the day, is by denying them access, because you certainly can. With numbers you can detect and you can interdict with certainty if you have substantial resources in those areas. And again, the cartels are motivated by profit and not ideology, so you can impact their operations. And so that's what we did. And we received a letter from the Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor on June 18th. We mobilized and launched, and on the 23rd, we were in place and began operations. The first week of doing these operations, as you would expect, you'll see a increase in numbers of apprehensions, because you got more people, more assets. We sent more aviation assets as well, more marine assets. In fact, 24/7 operations as we've been doing since the 23rd. So the first week the numbers go up, or at least start at 6,606. And of course the second week, what do we see? Dropping 25%. In the following week, another 25%. And overall, since we began the operation, we started with 6,606. We're down to this last week. The latest number is 2,974 undocumented aliens in the area of operation. That's a 56% decrease since we began operations, because the cartel, people are money. I mean, if you can imagine just $2,000 a piece, and that's cheap, and that's a minimalist approach in terms of looking at their profit. But just $2,000 for the cartel is almost $500 million with the numbers of UDAs that have been smuggled into Texas this year. So that's how much money.
Let me ask you kind of one more kind of out there question, because it's not splitting hairs to me. This is important. The way we look at, my community, I'm getting calls now, is it safe to drive in the streets of El Paso? So let's take Texas as a total, in totality. Are we sending a message to the feds and the rest of the state that this is a crisis, or we've just had enough?
Well, we've been very consistent with the facts and our testimony, and as you know, the numbers haven't changed on our webpage. We just report them. How the public reacts to it is of course out of our over our pay grade, and we just respond to those things. I mean, but I can say that the Legislature has been clear about this now, in terms of what made it very clear in the letter I got from the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor and Governor what they expect from us. And so our job right now is to perform, and I think we've done it. To your point, being from El Paso, because I think that's probably one of the best cities to be from. And certainly the high school you attended is notable for a number of reasons, but not me. But
well, neither one of us have been invited back to ride in the parade for the annual.
Yeah, we're not, no Hall of Fame for us.
Yeah, we went to the same high school.
But El Paso is different than, right now El Paso, in terms of how the Juarez cartel and the Sinaloa cartel are operating in El Paso, is entirely different than the Rio Grande Valley. Entirely different. And you don't have home invasions, you don't have stash houses. Okay, they're not cramming 110 people into a 1,200 square foot, bed or room inside or house inside El Paso. So it's entirely different. In fact,
It sounds a little contrary, but some of the landowners along South Texas who have these large swaths of property see more of issues than those of us. Literally, from my office, you look out and there's Mexico. I mean, we are butted up against each other. When you fly in, people sitting on the seat next to me don't realize we're flying over Juarez to make the landing, and maybe because of that concentration and proximity, it's not the same. But I appreciate you making those differentials. And I'm sure some of the people in South Texas are that way too.
Yeah, and of course, the cartels there, they operate, a bridge model. Most of the drugs that cross, in El Paso, use, and you're familiar with the cases and the groups and organizations that do it, and you understand Barrio Azteca, how that operates on both sides. So is there organized crime impact in El Paso? Certainly. Are they getting these types of numbers and having to deal with some of those immediate consequences, including these types of home invasions, pseudo cop stops, and some of the ancillary things that our citizens in Rio Grande Valley are having to deal with? No. Or some of our ranchers have to deal with? No, they're not having to deal with that in El Paso. And for that matter, the Marfa sector, or we're not seeing it in Del Rio as well. I think that we can discuss, where the Zetas control territory. I think we've seen more actions, but in the end of the day is that, we've been asked to prioritize, to have an immediate and substantive impact in the area of operation. And the area of operation, as you know, is for right now is the Rio Grande Valley.
So how much money have you got available, funding available, and where are we going to use it from today on out?
We were authorized, and we started spending money on June 18th. We're authorized to spend $1.3 million a week, and we're a little over $7 million we've expended thus far. The majority of the money is overtime and travel and fuel costs. Fuel relates to aircraft and marine vessels, and also vehicle costs. So there's nothing, we're not counting anything other than those additional costs. We're not counting, any.
You're not buying equipment for this. This is overtime, travel, and fuel for the most part.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just sustain operations, and we're doing it. Hey, troopers, Texas Rangers, and agents that are deployed. They're down there for the shifts. They work 12-hour shifts when they're down there. We work them, and we rotate around the state so we can sustain this as long as the state legislature and the governor tells us to do it. We're in a position to be able to do it.
Okay. Let me do it this way. I want to get to the tag, and then Dr. Janik. I'm not gonna cut anybody off, and we've got another committee hearing that's following this, and we're not in session. There's no jeopardy of points of order and those kind of things. So the committee that's following this, I'm just going to put them on notice. I know that they're monitoring, and Mr. Simmons is part of that. We'll just pick up whenever we end with this, but just kind of know that we had another one. But I'm not going to cut anybody off because we have some witnesses too. General Nichols, you're charged with the National Guard, and you're here just kind of at an invite to tell us what your plan is, if there's additional training, how you're planning on doing this, because there's a lot of people just want to know how the mechanics work of this.
Yes, sir. If I could indulge you for a second, for the record, and Mr. Chair and Vice Chair and members, thanks for having us today. Major General John Nichols, the Commander of the Texas National Guard, the Adjutant General of Texas. I'd like to just fill you in on a couple things that we're doing. Like today, we are down in the Rio Grande Valley performing Operation Lone Star with Dr. Janik's organization, providing, it's a place where we can practice for a disaster. We were down there in 2008 for Hurricane Dolly, and it's a method for us to work in partnership with a few of our other state agencies to provide some needed health care down in the valley. We've been doing it for 15 years, and we provide the logistics and the command and control. Dr. Janik's organization provides the people, the health care folks. We bring some. We've been doing that for 15 years, and we're throughout the whole valley. We even did a small stint of it last year up in Representative Flynn's district, because the valley's not where everybody is in Texas by any stretch. We are conducting River Watch 2, we call it. We're supporting Customs and Border Patrol. The whole National Guard's doing that. Currently 11 states are participating. flying helicopters with Customs and Border Patrol mostly 24/7, and have been doing that since March of 12. Prior to that, we were on the border, boots on the ground, again, federally funded mission. They changed us over to helicopters after that, after March of 2012. We are working with Director McCraw's organization for counter-drug. We've been doing that for 20 years, I think, ish. 200 people that work very closely with DPS and also the Drug Enforcement Agency and local law enforcement people to counter drugs. We just got back from a deployment to the Horn of Africa with some of our soldiers. We currently have about 800 soldiers deployed to Afghanistan, and we'll continue doing that as needed. So we're answering the call. We're ready for the next hurricane, and we've had two close calls, if you will, that we've been watching. The last one, Bertha, decided to not come to America today. I think we got out there and deterred her from coming because we were in uniform. And then we're also, if the weather patterns continue and we don't get some rain that we need, we're preparing for the fire season. So that's what we do every day. And what we've been asked to do specifically is to come and support DPS in their Operation Strong Safety. And we're always in a supportive role, so anything that we do, we're always working for some civil authority. By direction of the governor, he's asked us to send up to 1,000 National Guard members to go support Operation Strong Safety. Specifically, we're there to deter and refer them, working in partnership with DPS troopers. So they're in various observation posts across the Rio Grande Valley. We're going to go take their place in those posts so that we can free them up, and we're a force multiplier. So by us coming down there, we're taking that old job and now it allows the DPS troopers to be more mobile, more agile, more responsive to people coming across the border. We're working between the ports of entry. I won't say exactly where, but we've already talked about the Rio Grande Valley. But we're not at the ports of entry, and that's where the unaccompanied children have been coming through. So we're in there to help DPS stem the flow and stem the illegal and illicit activity that's coming across the border.
General, what's the training, what are the orders that your troops are given, especially when it has to do with actually confronting face-to-face someone who they may believe is an illegal immigrant?
So we're working with DPS on that. You know, my command to our folks is avoid confrontation. If we have our way, and Colonel McCraw and I have talked about not having our folks detained. He would rather that we didn't.
And as somebody who's not an attorney, what does that mean legally? Because we all hear about who has the authority to detain.
Yes, sir. As working with DPS, as state active duty National Guard members and Title 32 National Guard members, we have the authority to detain if we're told that we have the authority to detain. Unless we're conducting an operation, someone interferes with our operation, which this could happen too. But our direction and our rules of engagement are really rules of non-engagement. We're going to detect them, deter them by being present. We've already proven that in the 3 operations that we've done in the past. They just ran out of money each time. It was never a large effort. It was 300 soldiers or 400 soldiers in a limited location. Not where we are here. Although it's somewhat of a limited location, we'll have 1,000 personnel participating. We'll also have helicopters. So we're taking them through rules of non-engagement, if you will, but how we conduct ourselves on the border, first aid, Spanish lessons for those that don't speak Spanish. We're teaching them how to use all the equipment and the sensors that we're going to take down with us to use. And we're running them through scenarios of someone comes up to you and says, please take me to the Border Patrol station, and run it through our methods that we would contact our DPS trooper who's probably right in visual range with us and refer them over to Customs and Border Patrol, and they'll come get them. All the way to someone who comes up and is aggressive to us. You want to ask, we will be armed for self-protection only. So many steps will have to be failed by the individual coming to us.
Because something's different about the situation from the past testimony, in that there are a lot of people coming over, as you kind of alluded to, that just walk up to you ever, and so that is important to me, that there is that training and that legal divide there, because this is new.
Yes, sir.
The past has always been chasing people down. They're hardened under cars. They're running through landowners' fences. They're doing all that stuff. But we've seen it, and the testimony has been there's a whole different attitude to a part of the people that are coming right now. So, again, you're training your troops to be able to handle just persons that are, I mean, this is tough. I mean, we're asking you in some cases to be in a law enforcement role, because we've heard in the past how people who, and I'm not, we have an expert here on our committee, and Alan's probably had situations, and I've seen the training, and I've tried to visit those kind of things, and you got to make that split-second decision. And because we have so many people that are coming over willingly to give up, I feel for you, it's dangerous to, your training is a little bit more aggressive than that. I mean, I don't want to stress that enough.
So we're going to be prepared to defend ourselves.
Well, I mean, I want you to defend yourselves. I'm getting at the other side. I don't want anybody to shoot and ask questions later type of a thing.
No, and we've done 3 operations like this before. We had more of a forceful presence then. We were in full combat gear, a rifle and a pistol. We're gonna not necessarily present that image. And if people come up, we're gonna say "Espérate aquí, por favor," and I'm gonna call CBP or have a seat. Those are the kind of things that we're teaching our folks. We're not gonna. Since I'm just telling you, we've been in the Valley before, and folks that live in the Valley will be with us doing this. We're Texans, and our whole goal is to keep our image that we've built up over decades untarnished, because we're going to go do our
Cortez,
job.
I think, has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, General, for being here today, and appreciate you answering our questions. I'm curious about the goal here, or what is the end game? What do the orders say specifically from the governor? What is your mission for the border operations? I mean, I serve as a captain in the Air Force Reserve there at Lackland, and so when we get a tasking or a mission, it's specific goals. I'm curious as to what the end game is here for this mission, I guess is what we would call it.
Now, I hate to pass the buck to my friend to the left of me, but the first part that the governor said was send 1,000 troops to the border to support DPS in Operation Strong Safety. So in that, there are already operations going on. So we're going to supplement that operation by bringing more people to do the same thing he's doing, but at a grander scale. Because right now, DPS has a certain amount of troopers it can bring, and barring taking all the troopers in Texas and taking them to the border, we can't really do that. So we needed extra people to come down, so it's going to be the...
So is it a 6-month mission at 180 days that you're asking these National Guard members to do, or?
We're looking at least that long. We don't know when it's going to end, per se.
So there's not an end game, or there's not a...
No,
they will be on active duty orders.
And frankly, they'll be on state active duty orders. So
Okay.
frankly, if we knew had a date in mind, we wouldn't say it. We wouldn't pull in Iraq.
Okay.
We would end it when we end it, and that would be Director McCraw's call, and we would certainly be participating with him, saying, there's nothing happening here and hasn't for a while. You all would know that, because we're going to be transparent in the reporting.
Okay.
So, 0 is the perfect number, but it'll be something probably a little bit more than that. I'm not going to set up, because if we gave you a number, and
I'm just trying to figure out what the end game is here.
Right.
What is this going to be on a permanent active duty activation, or is this going to be, a year and then looking at a year from now if there's been some reduction in numbers? I mean, we're just going to keep the National Guard on active duty because of the governor's orders?
We don't want to be on active duty that long.
Right.
The intention for the...
And I would hope not either.
National
These are civilians serving in their military.
Absolutely.
But they also do have full-time jobs
They've
too,
got
or careers.
full-time jobs,
and
and they have to maintain their National Guard membership. So just like you do as a reservist, they've got to still do drill.
Right.
If we put them on the border for a whole year, they wouldn't be National Guard members anymore, because they haven't met that. So they've got 3 things they're doing. Their civilian job.
General, take that mic.
Their civilian job, their National Guard job, and their federal National Guard job, if you will.
Right.
which again, that's what we do. That's why we are. And we are a short-term organization generally. We come out for hurricanes, floods, fires, and sometimes explosions. And as soon as our work is done there and we're no longer needed by civil authority, we go back. This is a first ever for us in the history of Texas, and I think in the history of America, where the National Guard's gone to the border for a long period of time. And we're working through that every day on how that's going to affect our members, their families, their employers. So we're trying to balance all those. I think we're doing a pretty good job. So we're currently at our training location. We're going to Camp Swift, Representative Kleinschmidt's district, and we've got the first group of people going through training. Very slow, very deliberate, with Texas in mind. And again, we're card-carrying Texans. We want to continue to be card-carrying Texans when this is over.
Thank you, General.
Yes, sir.
But sir, it's not unlike what we already do in hurricanes and tornadoes and
No, sir.
natural disasters, where we have assisted DPS and other law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
It's a continuation of responsibilities of the National Guard. Correct?
It's usually a 2-week to
Yes, sir.
3-week
Yes.
ordeal, and then we're home. Not a 1 year or some longer period, or not longer period, but time, but longer than 2 weeks.
Yeah, because we've assisted the DPS on numerous occasions.
And we currently have a lot of State Guard members full
Right.
up with DPS.
We have about 12 people signed up for public comment as well. Let me get to Dr. Janik next. Dr. Janik, thank you for being here. Commissioner Kyle, you and I came in together in class, and it's always nice to see you in the different capacities now that you're Commissioner of Health and Human Services. And you've got some really good information. I think it may be new for some people, so I'm just going to let you lay it out and tell us what you've got, Doctor.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm Kyle Janik, the Executive Commissioner of Texas Health and Human Services. I want to impart just really 3 things to you today. The first is, in my presentation, I want to make the distinction between what the federal responsibility is at the border and where the state comes in. Secondly, I want to talk about the different fates that may await 3 different groups of 3 different types of folks who cross the borders, and then importantly, I want to get into 2 of the programmatic areas where Department of State Health Services and Department of Family and Protective Services interact after these kiddos have come in. So if you'll indulge me just for a minute, it's a short presentation, but on page 2 of the presentation, I've shown you a very brief org chart. On the right-hand side, you'll see the federal responsibility, and with our interactions, obviously Department of Homeland Security interacts with these kids through Border Patrol, and all these folks, not just the kids, through the Border Patrol operations. But with our responsibilities sometimes mesh with the Department of Health and Human Services, and that frequently creates some confusion. We have a similar name to our federal counterparts, and that lends itself to some misunderstanding in terms of what we're supposed to be doing or doing and what they are supposed to do or do. In that organization chart, you'll see the Department of Health and Human Services, the Administration for Children and Families, and right below that, the Office of Refugee Resettlement. This is important because the ORR has a responsibility for some disposition for those who come here and are here for any period of time, both legally and legally. Now, in 1991, Legislature created the Office of Immigration and Refugee Affairs for the purpose of administering federal funds to those who are here legally. So in the organization chart, you'll see the little line that goes to the left with the dollar signs that comes to the Health and Human Services Commission, us, and then the programs are administered through our Office of Immigration and Refugee Affairs, OIRA is how we abbreviate that. Let me get for just a minute into OIRA. OIRA, again, federal funds come to the commission, administered through them for the purposes of services and cash needs in some instances to those folks who are here with some legal status to begin with. There are multiple kinds of legal statuses that folks can have. I'll sort of rocket it ahead to page 4, if you will. First, there's a refugee. And in this sense, refugee means someone who is here with a legal status of being a refugee, and they get that status before they cross the border. some documentation. What that documentation is fairly soft. Having recently gone through getting a passport for my 15-year-old, and then when my wife traveled out of the country with my 15-year-old, I can tell you that our ability to send folks away without both parents acceding to it and all sorts of documentation is fairly strenuous. They don't have that same luxury at the Border Patrol stations. Folks come in, they say we're a family, and some questioning is done, and like good peace officers, I think these Border Patrol agents get to be pretty good. This is not a brand new phenomenon, and they can tell by body language and other sorts of things if things don't look right, perhaps a bit of experience and intuition.
Mr.
But
Fletcher
at
has
the
a
end of the day,
question for you.
Well, I was just going to, maybe he's going there, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
the human trafficking aspect of that, can you address for the committee about how they determine that this might be a trafficking situation and not a parent really with the child? Thank you, sir.
again, not a firm way, and the only thing we've been able to determine is in our discussion with the Border Patrol agents in terms of how they do that and what kinds of questions they ask, and they've got standard groups of questions that you can ask, and probably there's some fact checking in terms of names and that sort of thing back in there. They do ask for documentation.
Okay.
And the reason this is important is because if the Border Patrol agents feel, yes, this is a family, then they're given a notice to appear for their immigration hearing, but then they're released. And you've heard about the bus station in McAllen and large numbers of them going to that bus station. And from there, they're free to go. And so you have to operate on the assumption that they are a family. If they're not, and this gets into the area that Director McCraw has talked about in the past, where it's actually a smuggler or a trafficker, those kids are there involuntarily, or other sorts of, if it was just the kids that were threatened, you will go with me, because the opportunity for the adult to get in without being apprehended and deported immediately. So that group is a bit unknown to us in terms of the things that they use to verify that they are in fact a family. The last group is, of course, the unaccompanied alien children. Several weeks ago, the federal government dropped the term alien in there and just said unaccompanied children, so they still use the designation of UACs. If you'll go with me to page 7, this is straight from the federal government, and it just briefly tells you what happens with a kiddo that comes across the border without an adult accompanying them. And frequently they will show up and say, here's my grandmother's number, or my mother lives in Des Moines, here's her phone number, and this is where I want to go. Department of Homeland Security, through Border Patrol, takes custody of these kids. They then take them to the Border Patrol station and put them, initially, we're putting them in with other adults and trying to segregate them and whatnot in very, very crowded conditions, something very alarming in terms of the number of square footage allowed for each person, that sort of thing. Happy to say that about a week and a half ago or so, they opened up their new McAllen facility that will house about 1,000 unaccompanied children, and the conditions there are much, much better. So I'm happy to answer questions about what specifically happens with those kiddos once they get there. But in brief terms, they're looked at with a cursory medical exam, some questions given, they're inspected to see if they are carrying anything that's obviously infectious at the time, if there's lice, scabies, and so forth, if they've got a fever. If they have anything more serious going on, they get a little more extensive check. While again, early in the days of this surge of folks coming to the Border Patrol station was fairly rudimentary, but the Border Patrol now has bigger contracts with more experienced professionals, not just an EMT, but perhaps paramedics, nurse practitioners, and others. So when these kiddos get to the new McAllen station, U.S. Public Health Service and others are there to screen them for infectious diseases. That's one of our biggest concerns. As you know, Dr. David Lakey, our Commissioner of State Health Services, is an infectious disease doctor, and he has been bird dogging them from the beginning to look at the facilities to make sure that there's not the risk of transmitting diseases within the facility, but also who's coming in and could they in fact be carrying diseases across.
Dr. Janik, not to interrupt,
Yes,
let me
yes,
just
sir.
say that the people of Texas are very confident in what our Department of Public Safety is doing and our National Guard. We have experience with them. But this is a new phenomenon, and the one thing that's coming to all of our town halls, the meetings that we're having, all of the members have talked about, is everyone is very concerned about the fact that school starts in a month, and they want to know, are these children going to be in school with our Texas children bringing in communicable diseases, things that we've spent decades in this country trying to stop. So it really, right now, you're the guy that we are having to talk for in our meetings, and this is critical.
Yes, sir. So let me just address the immunizations and infectious disease component of it, because it's very important. We brought it up with the federal government. It's been brought to President Obama's attention, and I visited with the Secretary of Homeland Security. Dr. Lakey's team works on these things night and day, and they have terrific relationships with the folks both in HHS and in the public health service. We've got an ongoing dialogue with the Chief Medical Officer for the Department of Homeland Security. So a lot of times we're trying to break through some of the bureaucracy. They've got their processes, and another agency has theirs, and this is an important time for those processes to mesh so that kids don't get dropped along the way. Okay, so the vaccination in the 4 countries that we're referring to are actually pretty good. They were horrible in the early to mid 80s, and then over time you could see a gradual increase, and this comes from the World Health Organization. You could see a remarkable, I wouldn't even say gradual, remarkable increase until such time as for the last decade or so, perhaps longer, they've actually had vaccination rates that are as good as ours in the United States. 95% of the kids from these 4 countries get vaccinated for MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, DTP, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, as well as for polio. They do not routinely vaccinate for chickenpox, and we're on the lookout for that. Obviously, their public health services are not as extensive in these countries in terms of vaccinating for the latest H1N1 strain and that sort of thing, latest flu strains. And in fact, we've seen at least, I think it was just 1 case of H1N1, but we've gotten vaccines down to them. One area of particular concern is tuberculosis. Folks can harbor the TB mycoplasma for a long period of time, may be infectious, may have some symptoms, sometimes not. Now, in these countries, there's actually a fairly aggressive immunization campaign afoot that immunizes a lot of them. The immunization that they use is called BCG, and it immunizes not by using part of the tuberculosis mycobacterium, but a cousin. But it works in about 80% of the cases. Now, difficulty is, if someone has been exposed to tuberculosis, and you get the typical PPD skin test, they're apt to light up. The test will be positive, showing as if they've been exposed to tuberculosis, when in fact maybe all they were exposed to was that cousin for the BCG vaccine. So we can get a lot of false positives there.
There was a couple of cases, in fact, you mentioned Border Patrol. The Border Patrol chief in my area, we talked about that, and the original cases that were reported, one was from Deming, New Mexico. The other one was a young lady, my understanding was, who had that same exact situation. They thought it was tuberculosis, put her aside, did all the stuff, and found out that it was exactly what you had stated. But on that subject, versus Texas, I mean, what's the rate in Texas? I mean, it is a fear. We talked about this at the first hearing. We want to feel confident that if the children are integrated into different places, or just DPS, Border Patrol, our National Guard coming into contact, do you feel pretty confident that we've got it under hand?
We do. And I won't say that they count the vaccines, what they count a successful vaccination rate in those other countries. As you know, when you've got multiple vaccines given multiple times, and any one vaccine may immunize against several things, you could count it a lot of different ways. You could say a child who's had all of their vaccines, all of the times recommended, would now be immunized. Or would we consider someone to be immunized if they only had measles, mumps, and rubella, but missed DTP, for example? So there's different ways to count those. But I think, Mr. Chairman, our instinct is guarded. We need to be on the lookout. But at the same time, we feel confident that at least across those, so polio, MMR, DTP, we feel good about those. Obviously, chickenpox is not a big emphasis there. We've got to watch out for that, particularly as these kids, while they're drawing down some of their shelters at the federal defense bases, we need to be on the lookout for that. But we still do need to be cognizant of the real fact that there could be untreated cases of tuberculosis coming over, and that'll play.
Does drawing down mean they're sending them out into the community, or sending them out of the country? When you say drawing down,
Yes, sir.
does that mean here or sending them back?
No, sir. It would appear right now that what they're doing is, as the spaces open up in other shelters, and I'll get to that in just a minute in terms of what happens, the first, if you're going to get kids out of one place, first get them off the defense bases and get those into shelters in other areas. Okay. But there is some of that too in terms of these kids that are going off to meet their sponsor, maybe a parent or a relative or someone else who's willing to take sponsorship of them in another state until such time as they get an immigration hearing. So during the course of that, kids get screened, they get immunized, even though the immunization rates are good in those other countries. Federal Health and Human Services Department is taking no chances, and they're immunizing those kiddos again. At some point, when a determination is made, where will this child go? If they do have a parent or a sponsor or relative of some other sort in another town, in another state, then U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is responsible for getting them to that destination through the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
I think Mr. Dale has a question.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as it relates to public schools, we already have policies in place that require proof of immunization before students can enroll. Has there been any change to those policies, and do we still require school kids in public schools to have vaccinations?
Not to my knowledge, and since it's guided by state law, I think that's highly unlikely.
So the point is that if someone wants to enroll in a school, they're going to have proof of immunizations anyways before they're admitted.
Right. And again, they are immunized once they're in custody of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
I think Mr. Flynn has a question too.
Dr. Janik, when these young people come in here and they don't have someone that is going to be their, surrogate to take care of them, what happens? Do they then go into our foster care system, or is there a federal path?
Some of them will come into our foster care system. They may go to another state if arrangement is made by another state with the federal officials. But that's the feds will make that determination where they're going to go. If they're going to stay here, it's because the feds said they will stay here. If they're going to another state, it's because the feds are sending them there.
When counties have made, or counties or cities have said, we would welcome some of these folks to come in, do you follow them as they go into those areas, or does it end up being the local health services that takes care of that?
Yes, sir. One of the very specific asks that we made, specifically of the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security, is this. For the purposes of disease surveillance, we think it's enormously important that the Centers for Disease Control, federal agency under HHS, be made part of their incident structure, both in Washington, but certainly along the border as well, and that they be allowed into those facilities. Now, the feds may not want me to go do it, and that's okay. We would like to go along with CDC, but we think it's enormously important that their bureaucracy at Homeland Security not keep the CDC out. CDC needs to be in to look for diseases that they may miss otherwise. But here's the important part. When those kids leave and go somewhere else, specifically I asked the Secretary of Homeland Security whether we may know, man, woman, or child, and then that needs to be asked of Health and Human Services as well, if we may know where they're going and their names, man, woman, or child, all of them, unaccompanied, it doesn't matter. And the reason is we need that for disease surveillance. These infectious disease experts work backwards. When they get a specific case of something, then they start asking, where were you yesterday? Where were you the week before? Not just for the purpose of determining back to a single source, but they also want to know where the other contacts were and where those folks may have spread. So they need to work backwards to it, earliest obtainable source, and then work out from there to see where it may be going in different directions.
Tremendous amount of coverage has been on the young unaccompanied minors. Okay, what percentage is that? And also that group of adolescents, teenagers, what have you, that so many have associated with gangs. Do they receive the same treatment as far as immunizations and a follow-up?
If a child has not attained the age of 18, they're considered a minor, and they're treated the same as the others. Now, there may be some that are 17. Gang tattoos.
It seems like the focus has been on the under 10, 12 years old. What kind of percentage is that? Because I believe they're kind
It's
of
hard for me to say, but let me see if we've got those numbers broken down in that fashion.
Because they're basically props for what's happening, because that's where all the focus is being, when really, as Director McCraw says, our real effort is the drug cartel, who is kind of going around and taking advantage of this situation.
Could very well be. And Representative Flynn, you know, what took place in that home country to cause this, whether they were forced to by a gang or the family was afraid or they just wanted to get somewhere else, that's up to speculation. You know, we sort of look at what happens when they come in.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Fletcher.
Yes, sir.
Doctor, did I hear you say that you were asking for that information? Is that not something that's automatically provided to you by the federal government about the tracking of the
That's correct. It is not. It is not. We asked several weeks ago to know where everyone's going. I think we're starting to see a little more information in very general terms, but not specifically name, age, city of destination.
Well, then that's something.
And we think that's important.
That's something we need to address if we have to talk to our congressman from our state. But that's something, especially if they're going to be released into our state, we need to know where they're going.
That was one question that the federal government asked of me was, are you asking where everybody's going, or you just want to know the ones of your state? And I said, you know, if you're asking me if I get a choice, okay, I'd at least want to know where everybody's going in our state. So,
positively. Thank you.
And this ask has come, I think, from governors, both political parties. I mean, a lot of folks are very interested in getting this information.
That should be automatic.
Last I heard was just in a White House press briefing on TV, and the press spokesman said, you know, we're interested in preserving the privacy of these kids. So I can't speak to much more than that. But we will continue to ask.
That's automatic.
I'll get back page 8. Now, I've only got 2 more slides on this. I've actually got an expert here, Dave Gruber, Assistant Commissioner for Local and Regional Services, and I could pull Dave up, but let me just run quickly through this. At Department of State Health Services, obviously, this is Vaccine Central, right? And the Texas Vaccines for Children program is an allotment of vaccines for the state, and the vaccinations for these kiddos appears to come out of that allotment. But it's not that we're in danger of not having enough vaccines for Texas school children for the coming year. It's a relatively small number, and those sorts of buffers are built into it. So the normal vaccines were not in any danger. The schools have been calling, some members who have called me. There is absolutely no reason to think that there's going to be a vaccine shortage based on these numbers of unaccompanied children coming across the border. Communicable disease, oh, by the way, we have sent about almost 2,000 doses of H1N1 once that one case was determined. I think it was in a Border Patrol station, but we sent about 2,000 doses of H1N1. We expect the federal government will reimburse us for that. That's accounted for most of the cost so far. Hard costs that have come out of our agency. That was about just over $20,000. We have the Texas Center for Infectious Disease, which is a terrific place for treating difficult infectious diseases, primarily tuberculosis. Having a building there that is available. We're not operating it with other patients and so forth, but it is available to the feds. We've said if you get one that you're not sure, you suspect may have tuberculosis, for heaven's sake, let us take that patient. We'll square away the bills. This has been done in the past, by the way. We'll square up later, but right now the most important thing is to get that individual treated with the appropriate antibiotics. About a year ago, we had an individual who was apprehended and, in fact, had a very drug-resistant form of tuberculosis, and worked with the feds. They let us take that individual to TCID, and we had a good outcome. What we don't want is for them to let that individual obviously get out into the general population with any tuberculosis, any infectious stage of tuberculosis, much less one that's drug resistant. Regional local health services, we provided a mortuary trailer to the city of Laredo for contingency purposes. It's not been needed in large numbers, obviously, but this is the level of cooperation that Department of State Health Services has with their counterparts. To some extent, it's the feds, but to a large extent, I would tell you that there is a remarkable relationship between State Health Services and the local public health officials. Dr. Lakey is down there frequently in the Rio Grande Valley. He's got Eddie Oliveira as the public health director for City McAllen. Got a great relationship, and just as mirrors this amazing cooperation amongst Border Patrol and DPS, local law enforcement, the constables, the sheriffs, police officers. We went down there, and I know many of you have as well, and witnessed this cooperation. They're not too terribly worried about jurisdiction from the layman's eyes. If they're fighting with each other, it's not in front of us, not in front of those that are not in the brother and sisterhood. They work out these things and cooperate with each other, and that's what we're trying to get the federal government to do. Number one, get their two big agencies to cooperate, let the CDC in to see whether there's any disease surveillance impact that will come of this, but also make sure that they cooperate with us. We'd like to offer services if those are necessary.
And Dr. Lakey has testified to that cooperation.
Yes.
On occasions here at this committee.
Yes.
Are you getting additional funding to handle some of these issues that are coming up to you?
No, sir. Right now, as I said, our costs are very, very, very small. We're $42,000 in terms of those things that we would not be doing otherwise. Now, the other area where we do get involved, and Judge Speech is here if we've got very specific questions, when the UACs come, the federal government will hand them to Department of Health and Human Services, and a couple of things can happen. Number one, they can go to a federal facility, federal air base, for example, and we have no knowledge of what the facilities are like, and this federal property, it's their jurisdiction. We have no involvement with that. The other way, and the majority of the way, I think, is that Health and Human Services contracts with Baptist Children and Family Services, their largest contractor, and they may be others, to set up shelters. And it doesn't mean it's not like a tent, but to set up a shelter maybe in an unused building for various and sundry things. And then through residential child care licensing, our Department of Family and Protective Services license those facilities as we would any other residential child care facility. Now, our standards are high, as they should be, but in the early goings of this, we were concerned that we could raise those standards so high that then there is no place to put these kids, and that they would then back up in the bus stations, or more likely the Border Patrol stations, not the bus stations, because they only the unaccompanied, only those who are accompanied would go to the bus station, but back up in the Border Patrol stations with horrible conditions. And so we lowered the standards to that which would meet CDC guidelines for mass sheltering. So in the event of a hurricane or a natural disaster of some sort, we would have a lower standard. Still good and recommended by the Centers for Disease Control, and yet not as high as our current standards, which one would have to meet if you were going to keep a facility open indefinitely.
And Dr. Janik, we've heard about these, but large facilities haven't come to fruition at this point. I know they're planning. There's criticism that Border Patrol knew about this and didn't go up the line, so to speak, because in my area, again, I visit with my Border Patrol sector chief. I know what's going on. I know where they would. Actually, after the incidents around the country, most of the processing was done in El Paso, Texas, for all of them that were being sent to different states. So, but as it stands right now, we don't have any large facilities that have been mobilized at this point, other than in San Antonio that's on federal property?
Pretty much there are still ongoing discussions about some of those very large facilities, but we're talking about normally on the typical of 100 or 200. The largest, of course, would be the actual facility for detention in McAllen, which can hold up to 1,000, and they were nowhere near that number when they first opened. I don't know where they are today.
And Doctor, I don't want to cut you off. I want to let the members know, and there's another committee coming up back. There's people here, they're thinking they're in the wrong room. You're not in the wrong room. Somehow this fits in with transportation. I'm sure we can figure that out. Some of the members may have say, I know Mr. Representative Simmons wanted to say something, and then what I want to do, any member has anything they want to talk about or ask briefly, we'll have them here, but I would like to get to the witnesses that are here, and they were told you've got 3 minutes. We're going to have to really abide by that. Like I said, I've got about 12, 13 people signed up. That members, if you don't mind, I'd like to get to right after this real quickly, and then we'll have these gentlemen here for additional questions. If you don't, is that okay, Mr. Simmons?
Well, just briefly, Chairman Pickett, you mentioned earlier that the people like yourself that live in border cities, and I certainly respect that. I've been down to the McAllen there a couple of times now, but I think based on the lack of enforcement of our federal laws that we all live in border cities now in Texas. We're all certainly affected by it, and so we all have a genuine interest in it. And while I know that there are limits on what we can do, I believe, as I asked Commander McCraw in our very first Homeland Security meeting, that the number one risk to the citizens of the state of Texas are the Mexican drug cartels. And that's really where the issue is. Yes, we have humanitarian needs in these children, but they, for the most part, are pawns of the Mexican drug cartels and what they want to do. And so I just want to congratulate Commander McCraw and Major Nichols on whatever they can do and what they are doing, and the people men and women that work for them, to make sure that our number one priority continues to be the curtailment and the elimination of those drug cartels. And if they're using these children to expand what they're doing, then we have to stop the children coming across as well. And I know we have to have cooperation with the federal government doing that. And obviously securing our border is the number one goal that you hear out of my district. Of all the things that we talk about in my district, the number one issue that you hear from people is securing our borders on the south. And I think it is as much for safety of the citizens of Texas as it is for anything else. So I appreciate that. The fact that we had a Border Patrol agent killed while out fishing with his dad the other night just sickens me, sickens all of us. And so I hope that just makes us have the more determination to be able to continue the efforts that we have. But Texas as a state is a border city, in my opinion. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you. So, I'll make this quick. From my research, I think there's something like 8,000 U.S. Border Patrol agents in the state of Texas, and they work 3 shifts, which means at any one time, when you account for vacations and training and such, that there's about 2,000 U.S. Border Patrol agents on duty at any one time. Director, how many state troopers do we have in all of Texas?
We have 2,663 FTEs. We're down a couple hundred, so we're about 2,400, anywhere about 2,400 to 2,500 state troopers.
Okay, and how many Texas Rangers do we have?
We have 150 Texas Rangers and 622 agents.
So when we do a surge of DPS on the border, we're not even coming close to the kind of numbers that Border Patrol has, and many people would contend that's not enough, folks. It's not a question, it's a statement.
Well, that's correct, sir.
So when we talk about sending 1,000 National Guard troops down to the border, we're really talking about really a limited number of folks that are helping out with this federal responsibility. Would you agree with that assessment?
I'd agree that the only way we can augment that is to work 12 hours instead of 8 hours, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Plus, we have local law enforcement, and we
Yes, sir.
also have Texas Parks and Wildlife, or the game wardens are down there.
It has to be combined effort. We're leveraging local, state, and federal. Border Patrol agents we're working hand in hand with, so we're leveraging everything. And what we're doing is the Texas doctrine, take it to the river. You secure it, and you battle for it at the river and nowhere else. And so everything's being pushed in that regard.
Thank you. And gentlemen, if you would just kind of like stay right there behind you in the front seats in case we have a couple of questions. Let me get to our witnesses and
You bet. Thank you all.
Thank you.
and if not, does anybody have any other questions? We can let them go unless you think you witnesses so we can get to our next hearing. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chief.
Director McCraw.
Yes.
I had the privilege to go down with Representative Simmons and some other members down to the border just a few weeks ago, and everyone at the front of the lines, everyone's seeing the troopers, and now we're seeing the National Guardsmen down there. But one of the things that we're not seeing behind the scenes is that your non-law enforcement personnel that are working behind the scenes and providing the resources to keep up the mission. For example, with what you're doing with your analysts.
Well, we've organized ourselves to do what the state legislature and the governor and lieutenant governors asked us to do. So we're staffed right now. I believe with what we have, we can focus on what we promised you we'd be able to do in zones 1 through 13.
Okay, and then this is more of a long-term question, but last session we made great strides in trying to make sure we were trying to fill the vacant FTEs in your DPS trooper positions. Are we having those same problems when it comes to our analysts?
We certainly, with the cadre of intellectual capital that we need, certainly we need to put more money in that area. We have, when you talk about the importance of intelligence and having intelligence professionals, we have a ways to go there. We've got some great men and women in those positions right now, but we've had to cannibalize some of the slots just to keep the talent that we need. And clearly, a way forward would be us to be able to augment the analytical profession within the department. And really all of law enforcement needs that expert skill.
I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail, obviously, for sensitivity reasons, but I was really impressed with what we saw down there and just the cooperation amongst all the law enforcement partners, but also the supporting elements that were supporting your frontline troopers and making sure they could accomplish their mission.
And thanks, sir. And you raised an issue I'd like to comment on, is that because I'll be forever grateful to the Texas State Legislature for the increases for our personnel last session. As a result, we've got right now a class, we're able to staff our second class, and recruiting has been better than it's been in years. And so thank you very much.
Mr. Flynn?
One thing I want to talk to you about, Director McCraw, that I'd like for you just to mention. There's a lot of well-meaning folks that want to come down and help you.
Yes, sir.
And I've emphasized that I think it's more important for our law enforcement people who are properly trained to be able to handle that situation. And I would just ask you to speak to that a little bit.
Well, we're always concerned, what we don't want is good guy on good guy. And someone that may be well-intentioned has to understand that the rule of law is very important in Texas, and the state legislature has spoken. We've got the 4th constitutional amendment in terms of use of force is very important. It's something you've entrusted us with, and we've got an obligation to do it correctly, and we need to, and to the extent that you've already provided, the state legislature provide us right now an opportunity to take care of things. And there's a reason why those numbers, Chairman, have dramatically dropped on unaccompanied children, is because of what you did, the steps you took back on June 18th. So this can be done. Yes. And there's a strong commitment, and with the resources you provided, we're confident that we can have an impact without having to leverage different organizations or groups or well-meaning but perhaps in some cases misguided individuals.
Right. And we've this is not something that just happened in June. I've been working with you for years.
Yes, sir.
And I'm confident that you all have the resources, and that you certainly have the training, and you have the desire to keep Texas a safe place. And I appreciate General Nichols and your work, Director McCraw, and Kyle, thank you very much for all your hard work, because I know that's something that you all hadn't necessarily been looking for to do. But thank you all. You did a great job for Texas.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, one more.
Quick comment. I'm sorry. I want to address the fact real quick. For for the media that's here and for the people of this great state, that the $1.3 million you commented about a while ago that's been allocated to you, no money's changed hands. These are monies that you're using out of monies that you already had in your department, and we're asking for the federal government to step up and do what they should do. But if they don't, we'll take care of it here in Texas. But we, as a legislature, have to make sure that you get those monies replenished into their program that they're using. So all the ground that we made up last time, they're burning it up right now.
Yes, sir.
And we certainly appreciate what you're
Well,
doing.
I didn't brief you, Vice Chair, that we did recently, I think I've been notified as late last week that money did go into the department, and that money will be utilized to take care of the 1.3, but also to General Nichols to be able to fund their operations as well. We'll be doing an MOU we're working on right now to transfer those funds.
So that's what we need to know. Thank you.
Kyle?